Hey guys, how's it going? I want to do a quick little review of the Postman text that I'd asked you to read, and also some of the homework that I provided for you last week. And actually, I'd like to start with the homework. So, last week I asked everybody to hop onto a Google Doc and to take a look at some different modes of communication, and then to think about the characteristics, and then to think about kind of the values and the ideologies embedded in those modes of communication. I have the Google Doc with me right here. You guys will probably remember when you were filling this out. And I want to make a couple of points. First, I really like a lot of the characteristics that people pulled out. So, for example, when you looked at the billboard, a lot of people were able to point out that obviously it hinges on more visual communication than it does textual. Same thing with the restaurant menu, and even to a certain extent, the same thing with Facebook. One of the challenges, however, that I'm seeing is that as much as we're starting to pull out the characteristics, we're not necessarily pushing our thinking as profoundly as we can when it comes to thinking about the values and the ideologies. So, for example, in some cases with the billboard, people were talking about how it's more visual, and then they said, and so that helps people kind of buy a sandwich, right? Because they're just emphasizing the sandwich or something like that. But really what I wanted was to get us to the point of thinking more complexly. So, for example, if I was to think about the billboard and I'm thinking about the fact that it's premised on visual communication, or even on the menu and that it's premised on visual communication, I would also think about the Postman text, and I would remember that Postman says that visual communication doesn't allow for as complex of thought as written communication does. So in a sense, right, if we go back to the billboard, what we're seeing is that it's denying people the ability to think as complexly as they potentially could had they been dealing with text in the place of the visuals. So a clear example would be that when you look at a billboard and you see this kind of positive picture of something, you don't necessarily think of some of the negatives that might exist. Think of something like a McDonald's billboard, right? So here they're going to have this billboard that makes, a Coke, a burger, and fries look delicious. And when we see that, we associate the visual with deliciousness, but we don't necessarily stop to consider all of the ingredients in the food. We don't necessarily stop to consider the dangers that come from these sugary Coca-Colas that we add to our meal. And so that's really what I'm trying to get us to do, is to see that there are certain ways that we bypass complex thinking by using visual communication. Another one of the examples was Facebook. And there were some cool ideas that people had about Facebook here. But again, I want us to push the thinking. So I'd given you that example of President Obama. But think about Facebook and how it works, right? If you think about filling out a Facebook site, it's also asking for a lot of information about you. So we have the characteristics. Yeah, there's writing and there's visual communication. But if we're thinking about the ideologies, we're also thinking that these sites, these social media sites like Facebook, also kind of turn us into narcissists, right? That the medium of communication is premised on us sharing ourselves with the world. So there's this subtle I don't even know if it's subtle, but there's this narcissism that exists. So again, I'm trying to push Postman's point, right? That we really want to think about these embedded values and ideologies that exist in the modes of communication that we use. If we look at the Postman text, he does this very thing, and he actually goes to some really profound levels. You'll remember that in the text he talks about clocks. And when he talks about clocks, he's not talking about clocks just because he wants to say, look, the characteristics are that we have a second hand and a minute hand. No, in that discussion about clocks, he's saying that we as in man, has actually reframed our notions of time. Right? That time has become this mathematical concept. And put yourself in the position of man before clocks. Right? And if you thought about time, most likely you would think about it in terms of day and night. Right? And so you wouldn't be thinking 4 o'clock. You'd be thinking, oh, it's getting a little bit darker. You wouldn't think about a yearly calendar. You would think in terms of the seasons. And so in that case, nature is far more powerful. Right? Our time is dictated by nature. In a sense, you could also say that nature is controlled then by an almighty, right? So you have this real respect for nature and the almighty. Now, with mathematical time, we've turned things on their head. All of a sudden, man has created time, and man has put himself above nature. Now, that's some profound thinking that Postman is sharing with us, but that's the sort of thing we're looking for when we start to examine these discourses, these modes of communication, right? His point is that they fundamentally alter how we see ourselves in the world. They fundamentally alter what we think is important. Right? He talks about they alter the very content we can share, and they alter the content that we think is important. And that to me is really profound. And that's the sort of thing that I want us to think about as we move through this unit. So we've got a good start, but I'm going to push the thinking a little bit more. I hope that this clarifies a few things. Thanks.